Hello, everybody. Welcome, and thank you for joining us for the third talk in our new reality series. Today, we will be discussing fitting inclusive sizes and fitting them digitally. Today's speakers are Tracy Rickert and Alice Rodrigues, both senior consultants who have been with Alvanon for quite a while. We're very lucky to have them in their busy schedules. My name is Jordan Huggins. I will be your moderator today. Today's talk will run approximately 20 minutes, 15 to 20 minutes, so just a few housekeeping notes. At the end of the talk, we will leave plenty of time for Q&A. So please submit all of your questions to us. There's a questions drop-down panel in your GoToWebinar portal. You can submit any and all questions to us, and I will do my best to get through all of them and ask them to the speakers in real time at the end of this talk. If you have any technical issues, you can message me directly via the chat box, and I will do my best to help you out. Now, that's enough from me. I'm going to go ahead and hand it off to Tracy Rickert and Alice Rodrigues. Alice, Tracy, why don't you guys go ahead and take it away?
Hi, thanks, Jordan. Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending on where you are in the world. And thank you all for taking time out of your day. You know, with the current events causing so many of us to work from home, the days can be pretty challenging and interesting. We're all trying to find a quiet place to work in our homes and managing kids and spouses and pets. And then there's that self-inflicted haircut looming large on the horizon that we're all looking forward to. One of the challenges we're facing right now is how do we keep moving our businesses forward and continue developing product regardless of our physical circumstances. And this includes fitting. Some of you may have already been conducting virtual fittings with vendors. It's been going on for a few years that way, but for some of you, this might be brand new. And if you're also new to Plus, tackling a new product and in a new way can be pretty daunting. The one positive in all of this is that it's going to force some of us to think harder about how we use technology like 3D to get our work done. In fact, in a lot of ways, working in 3D will help you get up to speed in Plus or a new size category much faster than if you had to see physical samples for every style and fit iteration. Trace, you want to kick us off?
Sure, Alice, thanks. So our question for today that we are posing is, are we fitting most people in the size range well? And if we feel like we're not, what are some tips to get us there? As most of you already know, the market opportunity for inclusive sizes is increasing really rapidly. We're at a moment in time where a couple of factors are converging that contribute to this. People everywhere are getting bigger. That's the reality. The average woman in the US is a size 14 to 16, which is roughly equivalent to a size 18 in the UK and probably maybe between a 48 and a 50 in the EU. Even in Asia, there are more and more calls for bigger sizes. More than half of the US women are size 14 or higher, and clearly the business opportunity this presents for us as apparel brands, it can't be ignored any longer. There are lots of good options out there for Plus women, and brands who are behind the curve could potentially miss out on this. Another factor is the body positivity movement, which is being fueled by celebrities and influencers on social media. I think we all, see it everywhere. As more and more people are becoming bigger, there's increasing social pressure, not just for acceptance, but really for true equality.
That's so true, Trace. You know, we get asked a lot what plus size women want in their clothing options. And the answer is really simple. We all want the same thing, regardless of our size. We want great style choices and good fit. And what your size is has nothing to do with what you want.
Man, that's so true, Alice. With inclusivity comes a challenge, though, for us as an industry. What a plus size range is kind of has to be rethought. Traditionally, most plus size ranges maybe went from like a 14 to a 24. And in today's world, unfortunately, that's leaving out a lot of women. A plus size range now kind of has to consider including sizes maybe into the 30s or potentially even into the 40s. Alice, what are some of the things that people who are new to plus might not be thinking about?
Well, there are some things about plus that are different from fitting regular or straight sizes that you've got to think about when you're fitting or you're grading. For one thing, when bodies become bigger, there's a greater variety in shapes than there is in regular sizes. Even the posture might change a little bit as, people shift their skeletons to counterbalance additional weight. And the waist angle, or what we call the pitch, increases progressively as the body mass becomes bigger and it's no longer supported by the skeletal structure underneath it. One of the things brands come to us for is when they want to identify the size and the shape of who they think their customer is and to develop standards. One of the most common questions are about regional, age, or ethnic differences among different bodies. In this chart, this is an example of body shape as defined by the difference between the low hip and the waist measurement. And what you can see here is, while there certainly are some differences among different ethnic groups in the United States, there's also a lot of similarity. And you can also find every shape within every ethnicity. You can definitely see this represented on social media and in Hollywood. Plus size women of every shape are being represented as fashion icons nearly as much as regular size women. As we were saying, you can see more variety of body shape among plus women, and that it increases as sizes increase. You can definitely see that in these bodies between the 18s and 26s. Trace, you want to go into some more detail about that?
Yeah, for sure. For one thing, very few fashion schools taught us anything about fitting plus. We all just kind of learn it on the job. And most schools are still pretty new to teaching 3D. So first you have to understand how the body shape changes with size and the basic differences between a regular or a straight size body range and a plus body. The more curve and shape there is in the three-dimensional body you're fitting on, the more pattern engineering is probably required to achieve a good fitting garment. So this might mean adding things like additional seaming or darts, and potentially even a different ease over body built into the plus size range. Sometimes even style lines or proportions may need to be adjusted as well, and Alice is going to talk about the aesthetics in a little bit. If we break this down a little further, these two bodies you see in the overlay are actually the same height, but along the contours of the body, the measurements are really different. The bust level in this example is the same height, but the high point shoulder to apex measurement on the plus body is obviously excuse me, is obviously going to be longer because of the greater projection of the plus size bust. You also have to understand what happens to the lower part of the body or the lower torso as it becomes bigger. The depth of the rise actually increases as illustrated here with the black arrows. So in order for pants to appear to be the same length, the inseam actually has to be shorter. So the crotch depth is longer, the inseam is shorter, which is very different from our traditional idea of grading, and why traditional grading, could be adjusted for a better outcome in plus. As Alice mentioned, the pitch of the waist also changes. It becomes lower in the front and higher in the back as the seat becomes progressively fuller. There's also some tips about grading for these bodies. Alice, do you want to talk us through that?
Sure. Now, as we had touched on before, the shape of the body changes much more across an extended plus size range as opposed to a regular size range. So the question is, how can we accomplish a good fit on every size through grading? Or can you? Depending on your company's business model, you might not be able to achieve an ideal fit on every size, but you can certainly achieve a better fit on every size than you could with traditional grading. So let's take a look at what we can do to improve the fit across a range. As we all know, traditional garment grading was developed more to maintain a good pattern shape on every size, and there wasn't a lot of thought given to how the body was actually growing. It's pretty well established that bodies don't grow the way that garment grading works, and often not at equal increments. One of the examples is the fact that the shoulder doesn't grow as much as traditional garment grading. The fact is the shoulder is a skeletal movement, and the increase across the sides really comes from the additional flesh that's going around that and not from the body or the bone structure itself. So in a traditional garment grade, where the shoulder is half of the chest grade, the resulting plus garment ends up too big in the shoulder and definitely doesn't have the same fit intent. If you go literally to the body growth, it will work well in some parts of the garment, but again, in the shoulder, it doesn't work as well, because what you can see here is because it's actually growing very little, that you end up with a pattern shape that you can't sew, especially on those smaller sizes. You end up with kind of an odd little point at your shoulder point. So what's the ideal solution here? We have to kind of find the middle ground. It's important to understand how the body is growing, so that's your target, but you can't compromise the ability to sew that garment in production on every size. So somewhere in the middle, you find a place where you can get a good garment shape and get closer to the body growth. One of the things that's really important is that if you're having your grading done at the vendor, to make sure that they're checking the pattern shapes and not just going by the numbers. We all know these days that a lot of times the vendors are just kind of punching in numbers and they're not really giving a lot of thought to the shape. So it's really important that you work with them to make sure that those pattern shapes are good. And we can't stress enough vetting your grade on actual garments across a range. Here's another example of a pattern of a pant pattern where you see a little bit of a nonlinear growth that's applied here. And again, trying to get as close as possible to the body growth without compromising the production execution, where you're getting a nonlinear increase in the waist width and also a slight difference in the pitch between the front and the back to try to get closer to that garment grade. Along with this, there's also a lot of process best practices that you can apply that will help you execute technically as well. Trace, you want to walk us through some of those?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Alice. Another way to ensure the optimal fit at every size in an extended plus range is to ReBlock. So what we mean by ReBlock is adding an additional core size. This would reduce the amount of nonlinear growth that you'd have to build into your grade to achieve the shape changes that are happening in the bodies. There's a downside though, and we certainly recognize this and have been through it. Having multiple core sizes is more work for the internal tech teams and also for the vendors. So it might not be an option for brands with limited resources. It also depends on how high up your size range goes. One jump size may be enough, or you might find if your size range goes up quite high that you might need an additional one. So potentially 2 core sizes or 2 jump sizes. One of the challenges a lot of brands have is in doing due diligence in checking size sets. If you have to check the size sets in the physical world, it very much involves the time and the expense of having the vendor create a full size set of samples and then the expense of sending them to you. Then you have to press and measure the samples to be sure that they're within tolerance. find models at every size. And for anybody who's been through this, this is definitely not an easy task, especially if you're not in a major city. We all end up running around our building looking for fellow employees that are as close as possible to the size you need to check. And of course, this is with widely varying degrees of success. And then as soon as you find someone, by the time you get your next size set, they might be a different size. They don't want to do it again, or maybe now they've left the company altogether. So for these logistics reasons, a lot of brands skip the size set review process, even though it is the best way to ensure a good fit and correct proportion on all of the sizes. The great thing about using 3D avatars is you can check the size set without the time and expense of physical samples. The models never change, and they're generally pretty happy to participate. In this example, you can see the size 20 pant. Overall, it looks pretty good. Maybe you'd make a few tweaks to it. But on the 26, we see a very different story. The tweak on the 20 has turned into a major drag line on the size 26. And then we have to kind of ask ourselves when we see this, is it the original pattern shape on the core size? Was the grading applied correctly? Maybe the leg shape on the upper sizes needs to be adjusted somewhat. And without the benefit of being able to see these size sets, it would never come to light unless, unfortunately, you hear it for the first time from your customer base. And certainly nobody wants that. The other thing about fitting on avatars is the variability of tolerance and workmanship is taken out of the equation. So you are really looking at true pattern shape and the best possible scenario. You may also want to know how a style will look on different body types. So in this example, we're looking at the brand jump size on a 26, so their regular body shape they're used to looking at, and the same shape as the size 20 we looked at in the previous slide, and then 2 additional body shapes to see what the differences might look like on the extremes of body shape. So you might want to be looking at things like, will it be flattering? How might the fit work on another body shape? And any adjustments you might have to make it kind of look great across multiple body shapes. Alice, you want to talk us through some of the aesthetic?
Sorry about that, guys. We had a little technical difficulty. One of the other important things about plus is the aesthetic differences between plus and regular sizes. And Coco Chanel said that fashion is architecture, it's a matter of proportions. And that is true regardless of what size you're working on. Just taking the style lines from a regular size garment and putting them on a plus block is generally not going to work very well. The placement of details and the scale of them, like pockets and buttons and style lines, have to be given every bit as much thought as they are on the original smaller core size. Sometimes starting with some mathematical conversions to roughen the proportions can help you. If you think back to the example of the extra length in the high point of shoulder to the apex, that can be one of the places where if you know that difference, you can probably get a pretty good idea of where you want your neckline placement to be, or that first button at the break point on a jacket. Things like that can certainly, get you a good start if you understand what those measurement differences are. But that's not the end all and be all of it. You still have to use your judgment and trust your eye. Now, the beauty of doing this in 3D is that you can check all of those things without ever having to see a physical sample. And that not only saves all that time and expense, it's a much greener way of working, and it can be a valuable teaching tool. You don't have to go through every single sample in the physical to see that. Some of the details, sometimes you have to get creative. This is a great example because in this top, the Missy top has a single pleat around the keyhole of the neckline, and it's got a lovely clean fit. Now, when they went to develop it for the plus size, they added a pleat to the neckline to take up that extra bust projection and fullness without having to add a dart or something else that might take away from the aesthetic of the garment. So this is a really good example of taking a little creative license. We know that sometimes adapting things aesthetically for plus can be a point of consternation internally between designers and technical designers, and they all need to understand and trust each other and respect that the end goal is to deliver that beauty and that aesthetic to the customer regardless of their size. Another example here is in a leg shape, and we can see here in this one that the plus leg is actually less exaggerated and even a little bit smaller than the Missy leg. And one of the things that's really important to understand about plus is if you have very exaggerated style lines or very big flowy garments, sometimes those don't translate well into plus. Just like with petites, it's interesting that some of the same aesthetic interpretations that work for petites also work well if you're going from Missy to plus. And these are all examples of women's sizes. But this also is true for men's. Trace, you want to take us home?
Yeah. So the examples that we've shown you in this presentation so far have all, I'm sure you noticed, been on women's size ranges. And the reason we did that is because the extremes tend to be more apparent with the additional curves of the bust and the curves of the seat. So we showed women's examples to show the extremes, but we definitely want you guys to know that this certainly applies to men's size ranges and also to kids. We're getting more and more requests for help with extended sizes in kids as well, which is a really important segment of the industry that's growing exponentially. Okay, we hope we've given you guys a few tips that can help you, and I think now we are going to take questions. Jordan, do we have any questions from the audience?
Yeah, we've got a bunch. First of all, thank you, Tracy, Alice, so much for that. Really great. I know everybody was super eager in registering for this webinar. Everybody wanted to hear about plus size and stuff. So thank you both so much for the great content, and thank everybody for tuning in. We do have a bunch of questions, and I'm gonna launch into them. First of all, how is 3D going to make it easier for me to get started in plus if I have to learn 3D and plus at the same time?
Oh
Go ahead,
goodness.
Trace.
Yeah, that is certainly a challenge, right? If you just have to learn 3D on the size range you're used to fitting on, that's enough of a task. And so if you're trying to do it at the same time, definitely difficult. I think you just have to sort of break that down and give yourself some grace that it does take time to learn those things. The concepts of fit really aren't different in a plus size range. There's just some of those additional considerations of how you grade. There might be a differential grade applied, and you might be adding some of those different style lines, or like in Alice's example, adjusting the leg shape a little bit or adding a pleat or a dart because there is more fullness in the plus size range that you're trying to accommodate. So there is complexity there, but I would just say for people who have been through it before, try to separate those two things in your mind: your learning plus and the kind of slight adjustments that might be a little bit different from a regular Missy range, and then your 3D is just a learning process of learning any technology, and that just takes time and practice, I would say.
Great, thank you, Tracy. Okay, next question. This is related to, I believe, size sets. If you have different body types, do they grow differently across a range, and do you need to grade them differently from each other?
I'll take that one. That's a really good question. We've done a lot of deep dives in the data, and Different body shapes do grow in slightly different ways when you get into the plus range. But it's not a huge amount of difference. So I would say for most brands, the difficulty of developing different grade rules is you're probably not going to get enough bang for your buck. If all of your brand is about is committing to those shapes and just about plus, it might be worthwhile. But the differences between how different body shapes grow is really fairly nuanced and generally not practical for most brands.
Okay, great. I have another question here from Heidi. How should a brand approach deciding which plus body shape to target when we begin to be more inclusive? And then she provides a little bit more context. In a brand I worked on 15 years ago, we had to choose our plus size shape lane, but it's difficult to feel like we're not including many women who want to wear a brand. So her question again is, how should a brand approach deciding which plus body shape to target when we begin to be more inclusive?
Yeah, Alice, I'll take that one.
Okay.
Well, the way we do it is with data. So we first look at what is the population predominant size that you're trying to target. So let's say your plus size range, your customer demographic that you're targeting is women in the US age 24 to 50. We would look at that data and say, okay, what is the actual body shape that's more predominant? And then what are the secondary ones? And then you kind of have to decide as a brand, can we afford to offer more than one body shape? And the answer for 99% of brands is we can't. It would just make us have to have too many SKUs. And the sales per SKU probably, isn't worth it to offer more than one body shape. So the way a lot of brands adjust for that or accommodate for that is in fabrication, so more stretch, comfort waistbands, some different things that can allow some flexibility for the shape differences that can happen, especially at the waist and the hip.
Great, thank you so much, Tracy. Okay, the next question comes from Sam. I was wondering about the live model comparison, especially at the knee area where live model knees are closer together, they have less spacing, and the 3D model where there is more spacing. Is there a 3D model that represents those body characteristics?
I'll take that one. You can develop an avatar that is similar to your model. Some brands who develop custom avatars choose to do that. Generally, rather than trying to fit to a specific individual who's a representation of the standard, who may have a specific leg shape, most brands want to develop their standards or their avatars to something that's more generic. Clearly, anyone who's a plus size doesn't have much space between their legs. In fact, very few women of any size really have space between their legs. But that's a necessity of developing an avatar or a form as a tool, because you need that in order to be able to use that tool. So you can make modifications if that works for you or it's specific to your brand, but most brands are aiming for something more generic and not trying to dial into to a very specific individual body shape.
Great, thank you, Alice.
Alice, I would just add, oh, Jordan, sorry,
Oh,
can I just add to that a little bit?
yeah.
The question was about bottoms, but that also applies to the area of the underarm on a plus size form. Because it is a fit tool, we have to build in that little bit of space so that as you're fitting a jacket or a top, you can actually get the underarm inside that underarm cavity when you're fitting on a fit tool. As opposed to a live model where you could just ask them to, raise their arm and you'd be able to see what was going on underneath there and make sure that all the fabric of the underarm actually gets to where you want it to go. So yeah, Alice is right. It's all about building a fit tool, but certainly with a custom avatar, you could add some of those nuances if you wanted a different stance or different posture maybe.
Yeah, really good points, Trace. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you, Tracy.
Yep.
Alice? Okay, this next question comes from Julianne. In general, do you recommend percentage over body grading, and do you allow greater ease for plus?
Ooh, Alice, I can take this
Yeah,
one because
go for
I
it.
actually did a project where where we did it both ways. So I was helping a brand try to determine what their body ease should be in a size range. And this range was actually men's, but I think it would also apply to women's or kids, really. So we tried two different examples. One where we did a consistent percentage of ease over whatever the body was doing, going all the way up the range. And we thought that was going to be the way to go to have the most consistent fit intent as you go up the range. And what we found is not only did the men in the upper end of the size range not like the fit as much, we found that as people grow in size, like the inseam of your pant is taken up a little bit, things seem to look like they were getting shorter, just because in this particular example, the fit intent was relatively close to the body. I wouldn't say fitted, but more on the fitted side. And it just looked short and tight on the upper end of the size range, even though it had the same percentage of ease over body. So then what we kind of determined was we felt like we needed to increase and give a little bit more ease on the upper end of the range. But that was an adjustment we only knew by looking at it first in the virtual, where we saw it and we thought, okay, this is strange, maybe we should make an adjustment. And then we had the physical samples made and tried them both we tried them on virtually, and then we also tried them on in the physical and saw the same thing.
Great, Tracy. Thank you so much. Really good. This is just a kind of a smaller question that came from Chelia. She was asking about BMI. BMI is just body mass index. It's just the abbreviation for body mass index. This next question comes from Amy. What are the essential skills in this area you would suggest for new graduates? I think very on point question for our times right now.
Really, yeah. You want to take that, Trace?
No, I was still thinking about BMI. Can I say something about that?
Yes,
Sure.
yeah.
Yeah, so it is, the abbreviation is body mass index, and that is more of a medical terminology the medical community uses for things to determine or put people into buckets of either overweight or obese or extremely obese. So that is a medical term that I think a lot of people are familiar with, and you can just Google it and look it up, and it'll show different examples of body mass index and kind of how that is determined, how those different buckets are determined. Okay, sorry, Jordan. Now we can move on to the next question.
No, I appreciate it. Thank you. Okay, yeah, so let me ask this next question again from Amy, who seems to be or might soon be a new graduate. Congratulations. What are the essential skills in this area you would suggest for new graduates?
Well, I would say that the essential skills for Plus are really the same as they are for any other type of product. But what's different is the specifics that are unique to Plus, like the extra shape around the body, the extra curves, the fact that the body shape changes more across the range than it does. And I would also say for a new graduate that understanding Plus and being able to design and fit for it are skills that are very much in demand. And if somebody can acquire that, either in school if they were lucky enough to get some of that, or develop it early on, those skills are going to be very much in demand. So the short answer is the skills aren't really different. It's how you apply them, and learning what that application is going to make you very valuable in the workplace. size.
Jordan, can I add to that?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, so I was going to say, totally agree with Alice on the skills side of things. And I would say the other thing is if you didn't learn 3D in school or you learned it in a kind of more academic way, learning 3D, I think, is a huge thing that new graduates need to work on, and find access to that because I think that really is the way we are moving forward. It's a huge time saver. It does take time to learn that, but using it in practice is a huge time saver. Um, and I think more and more of us are seeing the benefit of it as we're working from home, and we don't, have as much ability to check things in the physical world. We're really seeing the benefits of how this can be done and help us in our regular workflow. So I would say if you haven't learned 3D yet, that should be next on your list.
Yeah, that's good. And actually, Trace, more on that point is that it may take time. You definitely have to invest, a lot of time and effort into learning 3D. But for those of us who broke into the business and started before there was any technology, you had to invest time in acquiring your skills no matter what the tools were. 3D is the tool of today as opposed to the paper and scissors that we had more years ago than I really want to share with anybody. That investment is an investment in yourself and in your career. There's no magic bullet that you can just turn something on and you're going to suddenly know it or be able to use it. No matter what your tools are or matter what your career goals are, you have to invest the time in developing skills and knowledge. So don't be scared by us saying that it takes time to learn that.
Yep.
And if I may add, as the marketing manager, we're also getting a couple questions, kind of related to how to further themselves in 3D right now. A really great point from Tracy. I would urge everybody, if you're looking to get into 3D or plus size, head over to motif.org. We have actually, it's an online e-learning platform, and we've actually developed some classes, some online classes for them that you can take right now. One of them actually related to this very topic is called Fundamentals of Plus Sizes. And you can start a free trial right now. And it's all about how to start a plus size line. And I believe, Alice, you were the course director for that.
Yes. Yes, I will.
So yeah, so you can head over to motif.org if you have any questions or if you're interested in sticking your toe in the water with 3D or plus size. So with all of this, I think we maybe have time for one more question. Our goal with these talks is to kind of not take too much time from your day. I know that it seems like we're busier now more than ever. So maybe time for one or two more questions. This next one, so Brianne actually asked about any recommendations for learning 3D, and you can, like I said, you can head over to motif.org. This last question is actually about maternity. What about maternity for plus size? Is it any different from regular sizes? And if so, what is different?
Alice, do you want to take that one?
Yeah, I'll take it. Actually, maternity for plus is really interesting because what happens, and we've done a bit of medical research on this, is bodies tend not to change as much in size or shape through maternity as a regular size does. In fact, some plus women will actually lose weight through maternity because they have additional body fat and nutrients that the baby draws from, so they don't gain all of that extra weight. And the shape doesn't change as radically. What a lot of pregnant women find if they're a plus size is that they really may not even need to buy maternity clothes, or maybe they just go up a size, or maybe they only need them for the very end of their pregnancy. It's really quite different, or maybe they can just adapt with different style choices, go for, something that's a non-pier waist as opposed to something that's more fitted. but it's actually quite interesting. And I'm sure the Plus Maternity brands aren't happy to hear me say that, but that is the truth. So.
Uh-oh, did we lose Jordan?
Ruh-roh. Jordan, were there any more questions?
I am so sorry. I've done this webinar how many times now, and I just forgot to unmute myself. I think we've all been there. Alice, Tracy, thank you both so much. Any final notes before we sign off?
Let's see.
We
You
covered
know,
everything.
yeah,
Yeah, I think
that's
just reach out if people have questions. We're happy to help, happy to answer things. And don't be intimidated by plus. The concepts of fit are the same. It's just you have a little bit more protrusion in certain areas of the body that you have to accommodate for, with either style choices or additional darts or seaming. But it's really interesting, and it's not that difficult when you break it down and you really think about it, as just planes of the body and fullness that you're accommodating for in the usual ways that you would in a seam line or a pleat or a dart or whatever. Plus really isn't that different. It just takes a little practice to retrain your eye.
Exactly. You train your eye because, like we were saying, the aesthetic proportions are different, the pattern shapes look different. But what we find is once your eye gets used to looking at those shapes, if you're dedicated to plus, those things will start to look normal to you, and you will learn over time what's going to look right to your eye, and the things that will work for your brand or the model or form that you're fitting to. Don't ever be afraid to take on something new, whether it's 3D or plus, especially to the people that might be starting their careers. It's all learning and it's all really exciting. And thank you all very much for taking a little bit of time.
Alice, Tracy, thank you
Yes,
both
thank
so
you.
much. Thank you guys so much. And thank all of you for tuning in. A couple of you have submitted the same question. We will be distributing a copy of the presentation and a recording of this webinar to everybody that is registered. So if you joined in late, if you are not here anymore, then you can't hear me, but we will make sure to get you a copy of the presentation and a recording of the webinar to everybody that's registered. Thank you guys so much for joining us again today. We hope that you're staying healthy. We hope you're staying inside, social distancing. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out to us at ask@alvanon.com. You can shoot us an email there. We really appreciate you again, and thank you guys so much.